Thank you, Rod. And hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Awesome. Lots of thumbs up. Thank you so much. It's really a privilege and a blessing to be able to be here with you today. And, I'm incredibly thankful time and time again for the wonder of Zoom and Microsoft Teams and other video meeting tools. It's really amazing that in such a strange time that we can still meet together, even if not face to face. As Rod mentioned, like all of you, I used to be a young person. Now I'm just a person. I'm a Uniting Church person. I've grown up in the Uniting Church. I've been knocking around the Hunter for 40 years now, and knocking around the Uniting Church for 40 years now. So I started off at Charlestown, and I've wandered over to New Lambton and over to Merriweather, and I've generally been around doing some fun stuff in the church in various contexts over the years, including being very blessed to have been a leader in the Hunter Uniting Youth Fellowship when that was still a thing, which was an amazing experience as a young person, and also to have some leadership of the Commons faith community affiliated with Hamilton Uniting Church. So I've been very, very blessed. And, those experiences of leadership amongst communities of young people really, I think, gave me a passion for the way that the structures of the church help us and also hinder us from being the people of God on the way in the Uniting Church. And through a series of events, I'm not really quite sure how it happened, but somehow I ended up on the Assembly Standing Committee. I was co-opted the first time, and then have just been elected. So I've been elected twice more after that. So I'm just beginning my third term on the Assembly Standing Committee. And the Assembly is one of the interconciliar councils of the church. So we have four, which are the Church Council, the Presbytery, the Synod, and the Assembly. So the Assembly is the national body of the church. And the funny thing about the Uniting Church compared to other denominations is that we are non-hierarchical. So each council of the church has different responsibilities, and each council of the church needs to take heed of and listen to and work together with the other councils. And they have different responsibilities, but you can't really say that one council of the church takes precedence over another in total. It's just in the particular things that they look after. So the Assembly as the national body is responsible for matters of doctrine, such as marriage, the definition of marriage, that's a matter of doctrine, or things like constitutional recognition of Australia's First Peoples, and in particular recognition of their sovereignty under God. And we're also responsible for providing a national voice on things like justice matters, such as climate change, and also responsible for overseeing the process for the formation of ministers. So there's various parts of the church involved in that, but at a high level, the Assembly recognises the colleges who train ministers, etc. And we look after various agencies of the church, such as Uniting World and others. So the Assembly comes together every 3 years, and that's called a triennium. And in between times, we have a standing committee who's a smaller group taken from the Assembly who meet every kind of 3 months, currently on Zoom for multiple days at a time to oversee and provide governance for the life of the church at the national level. And that's been a real blessing to me. And we've been reflecting today on climate change. So I guess I wanted to sort of hone in my reflection on being part of the Assembly Standing Committee as it relates to climate change. Some of you may know that I'm an environmental engineer. So my work is currently as a manager of environment and sustainability up at Maitland for Maitland City Council. And I'm really, really passionate about environmentalism generally, environmental justice, creation. And that's an outworking of my faith. as I've been a part of the Assembly and the Assembly Standing Committee, I've been able to be involved in thinking about what does it look like for the church at a national level to make a response to climate change, given that we now understand the human the human aspects of climate change, the way that we're affecting the planet, and that's in multiple ways, but it is one of the major ways we're seeing that kind of play out at the moment. The result of the Industrial Revolution is through climate change. And so as a result, I've helped the Assembly and via the Assembly Standing Committee come up with a national action plan for climate, which is looking at 3 aspects. And those 3 aspects were identified as a part of a president's conference that we did over in Fiji. And we identified that really there are 3 categories of responses that we wanted to make, which are practical, pastoral, and prophetic. I wish I was the smart person who came up with those 3, but I'm not. It's the Reverend James Bargwan. He's an amazing guy from the Pacific, was the person who helped us identify those. So practical, pastoral, and prophetic. So it's not only about advocacy. It is absolutely about advocacy. But as the video at the beginning of this session spoke of, it certainly has to be practical. It has to be about us walking the talk. And so some of the ways the Assembly has been able to do that is by trying to provide a national framework for the way that we respond, and helping the different parts of the church, including church agencies like Uniting, think about how they're a part of that. And that's happening in multiple ways across the life of the church, but it's really about how do we bring it all together and show a concerted national effort while continuing to advocate to government. We were able to, in between lockdowns, we were able to hold a president's conference in Adelaide earlier this year, and I was fortunate enough to be able to speak about my calling as a steward of creation in environmentalism. And I was one of a number of lay people who were speaking about their calling in their work and in their life, not as ordained people, but as people who nonetheless have a calling. So there were doctors and teachers and all sorts of different people, as well as ordained ministers. And that's this thing of every member ministry. I think one of the things that is also really challenging for us in the national church at the moment is thinking about, what does it look like to be church when we can't actually physically meet together? What does it look like to be the church in the digital age? And what does it mean to be Christians in that space, given that our faith and is very much about incarnation. So God made human, that this whole 2-in-1 concept. And then when you can't actually physically meet together and you can't physically take communion together, what is this kind of virtualization of the church all about, and how does that affect the future of the church and how young people engage in matters of faith? And so the Assembly has started an exploration of the church in the digital age, and what does that look like? And look, I could talk all day about the blessings and the challenges of the Uniting Church and the Assembly in particular, and coming together at a national level. But I did just want to say that I think one of the things that has really struck me over the last 6 years has been how diverse our church is. We don't really see it at a local level so much, because we tend to gather with people who are like us, who generally hold pretty similar-ish kind of beliefs. We tend to gravitate to the church in our area that's most like us, I think. But what you see when you come together at a national level is that the massive diversity of the church, the beautiful diversity of language that we have. I was at the Assembly that the first time that an Aboriginal person spoke to the president in language, and he was able to respond in language. That was a really remarkable moment in the life of the United Church. And we have, of course, the different national conferences, particularly, the Pacific Islander conferences, which again, just remind me of the diversity of the church that I don't see from day to day at home, but that we need to remember when we're making decisions together. And that can be really challenging. And it means that our decisions take a long time. Often you start talking about an issue and then 30 years later you make a decision, which can be like super frustrating, especially, you know, as a younger person who likes things to happen quickly, and it doesn't happen quickly. And, you know, I think that the other thing when you're confronted with that diversity is that you often have to become, it forces you to reflect on what it is that you hold in common and what you're really trying to do together, which you may not have to do at a local level. But I think that the real power of that slowness is that once we make a decision, we're able to actually do something quite radical. And we've been able to do that a few times, I think, over the years, and recently, particularly the recognition of the sovereignty of Aboriginal people under God. I think it is the most fundamentally significant thing that we've done as a church, and learning how to live that out is, I think, a great challenge. And I think our response to climate change is an opportunity and a moment where we can recognize and acknowledge that we're impacting fundamentally on the lands of Indigenous people across the world, and that impact is disproportionate. So the rich people who are causing a lot of what's going on are not the people who are worst impacted. And so that's something that I think we need to journey with and struggle with now and into the future. And although this pandemic is obviously front of mind, really I think issues like climate change and domestic violence and family violence and those kind of issues are things that we need to not forget, because the pandemic, I think, in some ways makes that even more important to be considering and working on. So as I said, I could talk all day about these matters, but I do want to just end by saying that I have realized that often it's when we get it wrong and when we struggle and when we fail that we have an opportunity to really let Christ break through. And that gives me real hope for the future of us as church and also us as humanity. Amen.